morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to come and learn more about rules. I know officiating is a big part of everybody's life once the season starts, and I really appreciate you taking the time to better understand some of the changes that are coming this year. I would remind you that it's a two-year process, and this is an even-numbered year, so every rule could be reviewed and changed this year. And as every year, uniforms are something that we have to talk about. So I would ask that you look at these uniforms up here and where the pants are on each of these players. They're near or covering the knee. And one of the things that has happened in the last few years is players just simply don't like covering their knees. The rule is pretty clear that the knee has to be covered. And as many of you know, a few years ago, we made a real stand on this, and we weren't real successful with it. The Rules Committee looked at changing the rules for uniforms, and it was pushed back, and so I don't know if it will be changed next year or not. But if you look at the picture on the slide, you'll note that that player's pants are clearly mid-thigh. When I'm in the replay operations center, we get calls often about how players are dressed and how they appear. And so this is more of a aesthetic thing rather than a safety thing. But for this year, our approach is going to be to get to the coach in pregame as quickly as we can and tell them this player is not in uniform. Please get him in uniform. We are going to try and be unobtrusive and take care of it before the game. We certainly don't want to change the outcome of a game because of uniforms. But the word uniform means everybody's dressed alike, and it's going to be our endeavor to try and get everybody to that spot if we can. Another hot topic the last couple of years has been feigning injuries. I think we've all seen it in a game where players look to the sideline and you see a coach maybe do this, and suddenly 4 players go down. I want to be clear that to the officials, the instructions are we always treat every player as if they're injured. We make no judgments as to whether or not the player's injured or not, and we leave it to the coaches. We do think that's an unsportsmanlike act, and so this year, the national coordinator will take concerns from conferences if we feel that that's happening, and they will review it and then reach back out to the individual schools, and we'll discuss it. The hope is that in discussing this problem will go away. It's just a bad look for the game, and we hope that we can eliminate it without doing any more to the rules. Many of you saw the play last year that caused this rule to change. The Pittsburgh quarterback was scrambling, dropped his hips to fake a slide. The defense stopped. The rules are such now with targeting that you have to pull up on a sliding quarterback. And so this rule wasn't in the book technically, and it's been added that if somebody starts or fakes a slide, the play is dead. The ball is at that spot where the backside of that player initially goes down, and we will stop the play at that point. This is not reviewable as to whether or not it's a slide. That judgment must be made on the field. But what is reviewable is where the action took place. So you could see replay come in at that point and say the initial action occurred at the 33, put the ball at the 33. Football rules are probably the most complicated of any game. I've been around a few other games, but we have more rules in football, and a lot of them happen because situations that occur in a game, the Supreme Court has to get together and decide whether that law is right or not, and we have to change it, and then the coaches do things, and so this is kind of one of those things that there was anomaly in the rules that if you were set up to make a fair catch and you signaled and then you blocked, it was a personal foul. Actually, it was just an illegal block. All other illegal blocks are 10-yard penalties. For instance, if you block too early on an onside kick, that's a 10-yard penalty. It's not a personal foul. It could be a personal foul if you targeted someone or did a personal foul act. And so the rule was just changed this year that if someone signals for a fair catch and then subsequently blocks, that's now a 10-yard penalty. Illegal touching has added the loss of down penalty. And there was a play last year on a try where the quarterback threw the ball to the tackle. Tackle dropped out to the quarterback's left, threw the ball to the tackle, If that pass is backwards, that's a legal play. If it's forward, that's an illegal touch. An illegal touch did not carry a loss of down, and so we had a long discussion on whether or not they should have got the opportunity to retry that play. And so we added illegal touch is now a loss of down penalty, and so we don't have to discuss that. It's much like intentional grounding, and so the penalties now align with one another, and officials don't have to spend months talking about irregularities with this rule. In many games, there is not collaborative replay, and the input was that there needed to be an opportunity to review that second half targeting to see if that player really did target and whether it should be disqualified for the next game. And so there is now the opportunity, if a player is disqualified in the second half for targeting, to have that play reviewed by a committee chaired by the national coordinator. And this has been going on for a long time in D2, in Division II football, and now it's available for all conferences. The rule is pretty clear, however, that it has to be obvious that this is a miss, and for those conferences, which include the Big 12, that have a collaborative replay process, I don't think this will be much of effect, because every replay of targeting has 3 different sets of eyes on it in the Big 12, if you will. So I don't see this having a huge impact in the Big 12. But in conferences like the Mountain West, if the official simply didn't get the right angle or didn't see a shot, a coach could appeal this, and a player could be eligible to play the first half of the following game. Blocking below the waist. This is a major change. If we think about the last 10 years of college football, the game is much safer. Targeting initially probably wasn't real well received, but I think anybody that watches the games realizes what an impact it's had in the game and how much safer the game is because of that. The blindside block rule also had that effect. And so the blocking below the waist is just the next step in trying to make this game as safe as possible for the players to play. So let's walk through this if we can a little bit. The A is the offense, and all A linemen completely within the tackle box, and I'll have a slide here in a minute that will clarify what the tackle box is, may legally block below the waist on their initial charge. Any other A player has to be stationary and in the box to be able to block low. And if the ball leaves the box, you can no longer block low. And if you block low in the box after the initial charge, it has to be from the front, which is defined as 10 and 2. I have this conversation with coaches a lot because they say, what's 10 and 2? I said, when you teach your kids to drive, you teach them to put their hands 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. What's important there is that block must be directed from inside that 10 and 2 to be legal. It doesn't matter where you hit them, it's where you direct it from. So if you're outside that 10 to 2 angle and you block somebody low, that's an illegal block, an illegal low block. Team B players can block low on the initial charge, and that's it. That's it. This is a significant change because when a guard or a tackle, let's say, would pull, a defensive player in the box could go low and block them low last year to take that player out, and they can no longer do that. So Team B only is able to block low on the initial charge, and that's going to significantly change how people defend the run. It also eliminates the block on the linebacker at the second level. So those offensive linemen that went to cut linebackers no longer will be able to do that. And the data pretty clearly shows that low blocks are the most dangerous things to player in the game now, and the hope is that this is going to resolve some of that issue. So if you look at this slide, the tackle box is from the right tackle, 2 over from the center, his outside shoulder, to the left tackle, his left shoulder. That box all the way back to the goal line is the tackle box. So I selected this slide because you see the slot on the right, his foot is inside the tackle's foot, and that's who we determine is in the box. And so in this case, that player would be in the box, and that means he can block low, but he can only block low from the 10-2 position. So if he comes back across the formations and hits somebody from the side, that's an illegal block. Now, I know That may sound a little complicated, but where the rule was before, this is much, much simpler for us to officiate, and I think it's simpler for the players to understand. I think there's going to be some unintended consequences that any new rule presents, but I think initially this is a great step in making the game safer. Another anomaly to the rules was that if you had a completed pass, let's say that went for 30 yards, and you also had an unsportsmanlike penalty, you didn't enforce the unsportsmanlike penalty. If you had a personal foul, roughing the passer, that is added on to the end of that completed pass. But if it was an unsportsmanlike foul, live ball unsportsmanlike foul, that wasn't tacked on. And so this year the rule has changed that unsportsmanlike fouls will be treated like personal fouls, so that will be added on to the end of the last run. Defensive holding is now an automatic first down. And you would hear referees announce holding on an eligible receiver, 10-yard penalty, automatic first down. All other defensive holds were simply a 10-yard penalty. The rule has now changed that all defensive holding is an automatic first down. It seems like not a big change, but what if you have a hold on a punt, a muff punt, and it's 4th and 40, and you have a gunner held? You have a scenario where you could have a first down in that scenario and change the outcome of the game very considerably. So this will be one that most people don't look at, but I'm certain that 1 or 2 times during the course of the season this is going to come into play and be of significance. Some editorial changes, coaches' booths. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. It just means that when you build a new stadium, the coaches' booth for the visitors have to look very much like the coaches for the home team. In the rules, there was another anomaly that didn't list a passer who has not thrown the ball as a defenseless player. And we know the defenseless player is very important because defenseless player comes into play for all targeting fouls. If you hit a defenseless player anywhere, you could have targeting, as opposed to a player who's not defenseless. And so the rule has been changed that a player in passing posture is now by rule defenseless. The discussion was, if you're not passing the ball, are you defenseless? Until you become a runner, you are now by rule considered to be a defenseless player and will be treated as such. Forward progress on a catch. Prior to this year, if you were in the end zone and airborne and you caught the football and you were hit by a defender and driven out of the end zone and you land on your knees, it was a touchdown. If you landed on your feet, it was a live ball and you played on. And so the rules committee looked at that and said this doesn't make a lot of sense. And so basically what all of this says is that if you're in the end zone and you have possession of the football and you're driven out of the end zone by an opponent, it's now a touchdown. The distinction to be made here is that if a defender does not touch you and you catch the football in the end zone and land on your feet out of the end zone, it is not a touchdown, and you have to get into the end zone to score on that play. So that's the one distinction. If you're driven out by a defender, it's going to be a touchdown. If you go out on your own, you're going to have to get back into the end zone to score a touchdown. Every year we see runners running towards the end zone drop the football. And they drop the football at the 1, and now you have everybody on the field wondering what's happening. So we have some clarification on a fumble at rest. So if you drop the football at the 1, it rolls into the end zone and nobody gets on it, it now is going to be returned to the spot of the fumble. The way the rule was written before, if nobody fell on it, it belonged to the team that fumbled and it was a touchdown. It's now clarified that we're going to bring it back to the spot of the fumble. Like all backward fumbles, it's at the spot of the recovery or where the ball would be dead, but all forward fumbles will be returned to the spot of the fumble and returned to the team that fumbled at that point. It's just a clarification, I think, that will make it easy for everybody because it happens at least once or twice a year. This distinction is important, and if you'll look at the helmet on this slide, you'll note that there really isn't any material here for the face mask to be attached. The face mask is on the newer helmets actually hidden. If you look at these helmets, for instance, you see the equipment at the top of the helmet, and we used to say the crown of the helmet was that circle above the face mask piece. Because of the new helmets, and also because we're getting better at targeting and really defining what is the crown of the helmet, we talk about the button of the helmet or the very top, and you'll see that the rule this year says a 6-inch area from the button. And so the crown now really is not the forehead. The problem we ran into in targeting was if a player's head was up and they contacted somebody with the front of the helmet, not really the top of the helmet, by using the definition of that helmet attachment, we had some by rule that were targeting that probably shouldn't have been. And so this is going to help us enforce targeting and add some clarity to what is the crown of the helmet. Instant replay clock adjustments. Everybody wants replay to go faster. I would remind you, though, that the data shows that in college football we average 2.3 replays per game, 2.3, and the average replay time is under 2 minutes. And so we've done a much better job in the last few years of expediting our replays. In addition to that, probably the biggest part of dealing with replay is where to put the clock. And so now, basically, the last 2 minutes of the first half and the last 2 minutes of the game, we'll make adjustments to the clock. Outside of that, if 30 seconds ran off, we're not going to adjust that on the clock. We'll just adjust the ball to where it needed to be and move on. I will say, however, if replay notices that the clock operator didn't stop the clock when they should have and we ran a minute and a half off, that does not apply, and we'll make those adjustments and make sure that the clock is right. This is the official signal for blindside block. It wasn't in the book. I think, as you've watched college football, you've seen the screening blocks on punts. We've taken that decleater, if you will, swimming back upstream, and made the game much safer. And so when you see the referee give that signal, that's the blindside block signal. Points of emphasis. Every year in the rule book, along with the rule changes, officials are given points of emphasis. They've consistently been the same for as long as I've been doing this. Unsportsmanlike behavior is always one of them. This year it's targeting, player safety rules. Everybody that officiates this game and does replay has to get better at targeting, but we're seeing the instance of targeting go down as players have adjusted to this rule. Disconcerting signals, clapping, defensive shifts. This is a hard one. Everybody does it. I think everybody at times does it to try and get an advantage to get the offense to move. Sometimes it's audible, sometimes it's physical, and it's on basically the umpire to decide when the defense has done something that's out of the ordinary. By rule, the defense has the opportunity to change the front, and we don't want to deny them that opportunity. But they can't do it in a manner to make the offense jump. And coaches are getting better and better at teaching this. What we want to see is that the movement that occurs on first down looks exactly like the movement that occurs on third down or fourth down. So it's a point of emphasis and something we're talking about as we meet with coaching staffs. Feigning injuries, I've already talked about. Unsportsmanlike conduct, taunting opponents is always something that we focus on. We appreciate, I appreciate when I'm watching games and I hear announcers talk about players acting like they've been there before. And this is a team game, and our instructions to players is when you score, go find a teammate. Don't taunt an opponent. Find a teammate. It's a team game. Stay away from those scenarios that create unsportsmanlike acts that have to be punished by officials. Uniforms I've touched on. I hope that in conjunction with coaches we'll be able to make some headway there. And finally, sideline management and control. I think we've done a pretty good job. I think coaches are working hard with us. Our rule is pretty steadfast. If you're on the green and you're arguing an officiating decision, you're going to get a penalty flag. But if you stay in the white in the coach's area, we're going to listen to you. So I think that concludes my slides. I'll be happy to entertain any questions. There's one
Good morning.
Morning.
Ken Capps from Football Writers of America. Do you have any statistics? Sorry about this microphone. Statistics on targeting calls that have been overturned in the Big 12 last season, and also, just like targeting is a judgment call, how are you going to determine when a player is feigning an injury?
We don't determine when a player feigns an injury as officials. We simply don't do it. The process that's in place now is a coach basically files a complaint that the other team is doing that. And you know, why would that happen? You don't want to use the timeout, and the tempo of our games are pretty amazing. We average 183 plays a game in the Big 12. We've been there for about the last 5 years, and quite frankly, the rest of the country's caught up to us. They used to be at 160, 165, and pretty much all of college football is at 183 now. And so defenses simply are stressed to maintain the tempo of the game, and it's one way to avoid or using a timeout to slow the game down. I get that, but it's clearly been listed as an unsportsmanlike act. That will be left to the conferences to decide, and it'll be a scenario where that discussion will take place, and hopefully it doesn't take place a second time. The national coordinators got involved so that coaches hate calling in on other coaches, right? I mean, that's the last thing they want to do. They would like somebody else to deal with it. And so it's just an opportunity now for somebody else to look at this outside of a certain conference and give their opinion as to whether that player is really injured or not. The number of targetings overturned in the Big 12, I don't have that data in front of me, but we have, I do have all of those numbers. The numbers of targeting per game has come down considerably, and generally we have very few. What our officials are instructed is, don't throw if you don't know. So if you have a holding or a pass interference or you simply don't throw unless you know. The game's at high speed and it's really difficult to officiate, but if you know it's a foul, then you're going to put the marker down. That does not apply to targeting. Because targeting occurs outside your frame of reference and is so fast, if you think it's targeting, because it's reviewable, go ahead and put the flag down. Those are the targeting fouls that generally are reversed, but it is properly handled that way. But as you recall, 2 years ago, targeting is now can be initiated by the booth, and so we're pretty effective, and our numbers demonstrate that we're doing a pretty good job of targeting.
Yeah, Greg Barry Trammell with the Oklahoman. You guys aren't legislators, you're policemen. You just enforce the laws. But if you were able to change rules, what would be the best rule you would like to see changed that would help officials make the game easier for them?
You're trying to get me in trouble, Barry, because I'll say something that maybe everybody else doesn't. I will say this. I think this low blocking rule is the step in the right direction. Probably the hardest call for us was that second level block. Ineligible downfield is a really difficult call for us because that's a 3-yard barrier. Offensive linemen can't go beyond 3 yards on a pass, okay? If you go beyond and you break that plane, you're ineligible downfield. The time frame for that enforcement is when the ball is released. I don't know anybody that can watch the player and know when he's 3 yards downfield in relation to when the ball is released. So we're not very good at that play. And with the RPOs, we see it constantly. A few years ago, the NFL rule is 1 yard, by the way. College football pushes back on that because if it's 1 yard, now it doesn't look like a run and it changes the RPO effect, if you will. From a pure officiating, that would be something that I would like to see us take a look at and limit them to 1 yard. I don't think it will happen because of the RPO. And as the RPO becomes more prevalent in the NFL, I think they're going to deal with this question a little bit too at some point. But I think the low blocking rule helps us a lot, and I think ineligibles downfield is another area. I think I know that when I talk to our coaches, the two things that are the hardest things for them and for us is what's holding. What's holding and when do we call it? And what coaches will tell you is what I say all the time is, was there material restriction that was relevant to the play? And so I always use the example, the left tackle holds, throws the defender to the ground as the running back gets tackled after a 1-yard gain to the right. Do we want that play called? Do we want to stop the game and decline the penalty? And so those kind of decisions are what's going on with officials that they have to make. And I don't know that people get that all the time. Defensive pass interference, the number of passes we have in our game, and the amount of contact that occurs, it makes that a very difficult call too. But I don't see that ever changing. We just have to get better and see that play from the defensive perspective better than we do right now.
Ian Boyd from Inside Texas. Can you clarify a little bit on the low blocking rule and who's allowed to block low? In particular, if a player's in the box off the ball and they're blocking back against the action, are they allowed to throw a cut block at like an unblocked edge, or do they have to be high?
That edge player would have to be facing them. So a defensive end comes across the line and stays parallel to the line of scrimmage. The only way you can block him is from the side. So that would be a foul. If he turns and faces that back coming across, then the back can block low as long as the ball's still in the box and the block is in the box.
So he cannot cut block unless he turns to him.
That's correct.
Even if he's in the box.
That's correct. Yeah, once you're a stationary player in the box and it's not your initial move, the block has to be from 10-2. So if you come from the side, that's not 10-2 and it's an illegal block.
Randy Peterson, Des Moines Register. Will the ESPN Plus games have comparable TV replay capabilities as games on other networks?
That's a question you're going to ask somebody way above my pay grade. I have no idea. Our system is DV Sport, and depending on who TV is, that feed comes in. I don't have any input on that. It just depends who the carrier is and what they do. That would be an Ed Stewart question, not a Greg Burks question.
Hey, Greg, Brian Davis, Austin American Statesman. I wanted to ask about pace of play. Have the TV networks done any sort of leaning or influencing on college football to either maybe go with the NFL model of spotting the play clock on the spot of the ball to get the games into tighter 3-hour windows?
Yeah. We are averaging 3 hours at 18 minutes in the Big 12. That's down from about 3:28 just a couple of years ago. We made a real push to try and make sure that we expedite the game. The first time I was up here, I talked about length of games and blamed it on our media partners, and Commissioner Bowlesby said, "Nice job, your first time up there and you throw our media partners under the bus." That's not what I intended to do. But the very same rules that we use in our games are used in Division II games, and you go to a Division II game and see it played in 2 hours and 10 minutes. So it is the nature of the game. We could shorten the game if we wound the clock on incomplete passes, and that's been brought forward. But understand, every time we shorten the game, we also lessen the number of plays in the game. I really think the college game is in a very great place. As Barry said, I'm not a legislator. I don't like being a policeman. I like to think that we're a facilitator of the game, not maybe a policeman. But I do believe that college football wouldn't be college football without a 20-minute halftime and the bands, and that's the difference in the NFL game, is a 10-minute, 15-minute halftime. If we cut the halftime and cut out some of what I think is very valuable in college football, we'll be in a position where we're playing the games under 3 hours and 15 minutes. But to me, that's not as important as the whole college experience. Football officials show up 4 hours before the game. They fly in the night before. They fill out all the paperwork afterwards. They're committing 48 hours. Whether we play in 3:18 or 3:30 from an officiating perspective, it doesn't impact our life at all. Yeah.
Kirk Bowles from the Austin American-Statesman. He said the average replay time is under 2 minutes, and sitting in press boxes and watching from home, it seemed like it's about 10 minutes sometimes. Is there any way to, shorten that even more? And as a follow-up, is the horns down issue a dead issue?
I was waiting for that question.
I knew
I
you
knew it was
were.
coming sooner or later. I mean, I was waiting for somebody to ask that question. So when I say we're under 2 minutes, that's all replays over the entire season. There are always certain replays that are really significant, that take longer just because the nature of the play. There may be so many aspects to it that it just takes a little bit longer. I think we do a pretty good job in managing that time frame. And the one time that it does take, I don't think any replay took 10 minutes, but let's say 4 minutes, that does feel like a long time. I mean, Barry asked me what rules would I change. I'd love to see us treat college football the way golf does. The playing through. Let's do tries and kicks and play through and show it in the window and show the commercial at the same time and see if we can move this thing along, if that's really the concern. But I would go back to 3 hours and 18 minutes for the game to be played with replays involved from last year. I think we're doing a pretty good job. Let me be very clear with horns down. I have no ownership on this symbol. This symbol, it's the same as all other signals. It's when you do it, who you do it to, and which manner you do it to. Please, the state of Oklahoma, I meant no offense. You don't have to send me emails. We are just looking at that as any other act, and you note that unsportsmanlike conduct is in there. It is not about horns up or horns down. It's the manner that you do anything on the field to an opponent in an unsportsmanlike manner. Thank you very much. I appreciate you guys.